Well, hello everyone, and welcome to this special book launch event for the ABC Diversity, helping kids and ourselves embrace our differences by Carolyn Helsel and Y. Joy Harris Smith. Whether you're watching us here on Zoom or if you're watching us on Facebook Live, we're so grateful that you're here. We're grateful that you've wrangled the kids and that you're able to be with us tonight. We'd love to know who's in the room. If you have a chance, we invite you to leave your name and where you're from in the chat box. And if you are on Zoom, you may want to, up in the right-hand corner, switch to speaker view so that you'll be able to see the speakers big and clear when they're talking instead of the gallery view. So you toggle between the speaker and gallery view there. So let me introduce myself. I'm Deborah Arca. I'm the marketing director at Chalice Press, and I'm also a mother of two teenage stepsons. Let me quickly introduce our fantastic guests who are with us tonight and who will be leading us in this conversation. So Carolyn Helsel is the author of, is the co-author of the ABCs of Diversity. Carolyn, can you wave wherever you are there? Okay, she's up there waving. Carolyn is a professor of preaching at Austin Seminary and is also the author of Anxious to Talk About It, Helping White Christians Talk Faithfully About Racism, as well as the follow-up book, Preaching About Racism, A Guide for Faith Leaders. She is the mother of two children. Hey, Carolyn. Next, we have Joy Harris Smith. Can you wave? And Joy is the other co-author of the ABCs of Diversity and is a New York City special education teacher with more than 17 years of experience teaching junior high school youth through graduate school students. And I want to say you deserve a medal for that, Joy. She's also a lecturer in speech communication ministry at Princeton Theological Seminary and has 3 young children. Hi, Joy.
2, you giving me extra babies. Don't do that.
I'm so sorry. That's 2. Not good. Okay, she has 2 children. Sorry about that. Okay, and then also joining us tonight are 3 other guests who are also authors, educators, and parents. Jennifer Harvey, can you wave? Jennifer Harvey is the author of Raising White Kids, Bringing Up Children in a Racially Unjust America, and Dear White Christians, for those still longing for racial reconciliation. She is a professor of religion at Drake University and has 2 children. All right, 2 children. Patrick Reyes is our next guest, and there he is waving. Hey, Patrick. He's the author of Nobody Cries When We Die, God, Community, and Surviving to Adulthood. And he serves as the Director of Strategic Partnerships for Doctoral Initiatives at the Forum for Theological Exploration in Atlanta. And he has 2 young children. Mihee Kim-Kort, she is the author of several books. Mihee, can you wave? Can you see Mihee? There's Mihee. Mihee, author of several books, including Outside the Lines, How Embracing Your Queerness Will Transform Your Faith. And she is an ordained minister in the Presbyterian PCUSA Church. And she has 3 children. Got that right? All right. Hey there, Mihee. All right. Thanks you all. Before we begin, please know that we'll be taking questions toward the end. So if you have questions along the way, please go ahead and put them in the chat box, and I will be gathering those and lifting as many of those up as we can at that time. Thanks again for being here, everyone, and I'm going to turn it over to Joy to begin.
Okay, good evening once again, and thank you for taking the time to join us. Since we're going to be diving into a topic which can cause angst, visceral angst, and challenge, we're going to begin with 3 collective deep breaths. So at the count of 3, if you would just inhale and exhale with me deeply. And if it feels safe for you, close your eyes. Okay, ready? 1, 2, 3. Inhale, exhale. One more time. Inhale, exhale. Last time. Inhale, exhale. And if I can offer anything for this moment, it would be that we push past the fear, which often is evidenced in our silence. And I'll pass it on now to Carolyn.
Thanks, Joy. Thanks for that deep breath. I know I needed it. And just by way of brief introduction, Joy and I are so excited to be able to offer this book to the world. In one of our conversations together early on, I let Joy know that I feel like I really needed this book, and particularly because as a mom of white kids who are privileged in a number of different ways, there's things that I find easier to talk about than others. And having this conversation with Joy and doing some deep dives into current research on other forms of diversity was really kind of challenging myself to take seriously this commitment to inclusivity that I've been wanting to do in my career. I teach preaching, and in helping adults talk about racism through preaching, I found I had a lot of people asking me questions. Well, how do we do this with children? And I thought, wow, that's a really great question. And so wanting to dig deeply, specifically into how do we talk about racism with children, but also gender identity and sexual orientation and religious identity. How do we help our children become allies across our differences, which often means starting with us in our own learning and our own journey. And so that's been some of my experience. One of my children, when she was about 3, I was trying to talk to her about Martin Luther King Jr. It was MLK Day, and we were talking about Black people and white people, and MLK working hard on behalf of Black people against white people who were trying to make things really, really hard for Black people, and how he died because he was working for on behalf of Black people. And my daughter looked at me and she said, "Mom, are we white?" Because I'm talking about this in these generalities, and she's thinking, well, I don't look like Martin Luther King Jr., so that must mean that I'm white. And I could see this sense of shame within her, wondering, am I part of this group that has made it so hard for Black people? And so part of my struggle has been, how do I help my children understand the history of privilege and discrimination, but also give them hope? So I looked up an image of the March on Washington where MLK gave his "I Have a Dream" speech. And there in the crowds, if you zoom in really closely, you can see the faces of a few white people in this huge mob, and just pointing out to my daughter that, no, there are white people also who are working for change, and helping her see herself as someone who can work for change. So stories like that I've included in the book, but giving all of our children, again, a sense of hope, a sense of identity, that they can all be part of this work for a better world. So that's just a little bit that I wanted to share with you all. And I'm so excited to learn from some of these other amazing folks on here tonight about how they're encouraging and providing great role modeling for their children and how to make a change in this world. So I'll turn it back over to Joy.
Thank you, Carolyn. I've been toggling between a couple of different stories, but before I was a parent, I was an educator. And so I think that I want to possibly share a story about the realities that are happening for young people as it relates to identities. I taught in junior high school in New York City, and I started out as a substitute teacher, and I was a part of this group, New York City Teaching Fellows. And I'd been working with this 8th grade group, and one young lady at the time, or actually when I first came into the class, I didn't know who she was. And I referred to the student as he because I thought that the student was a he. And the students corrected me right away and said, "Miss, that's a she." And I said, "Oh, okay." And later on, the young lady had a situation with another female. And the reality of the situation I learned was just that children are dealing with an array of issues of identity crises. And I learned to be sympathetic and understanding and open as an educator. And that has helped me as a parent when my son identified or misidentified someone in an elevator. And I learned even there at that moment that children have notions of what male and female are, and they get those very early and they're internalizing them and they're making those kinds of decisions. So how can I help my children be able to show respect and concern for all people, even as they are part of a group that has also been challenged and marginalized? And I think I'm turning it over back to Deb or Carolyn.
Joy, can you, I think we're ready. I think if you can go through the ABCs, I think that would be terrific.
Okay, am I going through the first one? Okay.
Yeah.
So the first one are the automatic ABCs. These are unhelpful but predictable responses. The first A is afraid. If you are afraid, ask yourself what makes you feel afraid in this space. Oftentimes we have these reactions and they are bodily reactions, and we are taught sometimes to not pay attention to those. But we should pay attention to those and teach kids to pay attention to those. B is back away. If you notice yourself physically wanting to back away, figure out why. So the first is afraid. You notice you feel afraid, and the B is the actual physical where you start to sort of retreat. C is control. If you notice the impulse in yourself to control the circumstances, figure out why. Observe your reactions, write them down rather than running away from them. And so the control sometimes can look like steering the conversation or changing the topic or somehow steering from what's present for you in that particular moment. Carolyn?
Yeah, so these ABCs, as we start off the book, are what are kind of guiding our ideas of how we catch ourselves in these moments of acknowledging that we're helping our kids, but first we're kind of helping ourselves. So in our understandings of diversity, first those automatic ABCs that Joy just went through, then how do we change? How do we shift from those automatic responses that our bodies may put us into, this automatic fear, and switch into a more intentional space where we think to ourselves, okay, this is my go-to, but how do I change my actual physical habits? So that first ABCs going into this intentional set is to acknowledge that there's difference around me, and that is what is making me uncomfortable. That's what's making me feel like backing away. The B stands for being present. Again, being comfortable with being uncomfortable. Be present, acknowledging that this is what you're going through. And then is there a way, C, to physically come closer, to move towards the discomfort rather than holding back or withdrawing? Can you come closer to the discomfort and engage in conversation? So these are, that's the second of 3 sets. And Joy, why don't you finish us up?
Okay, so the third is the interpersonal ABCs, and this is about building a more just society. And so after we've kind of noticed the first set, and then we've gone to trying to make some substantive change in our behavior and our actions, these interpersonals start to branch out. Right? So the first A is access. What information do you have at your disposal for the interpersonal or social dynamics going on around you? To what resources, networks of relationships, or skills can you give others access to help them better navigate this situation? B is build. How can you build upon what you already know, or the resources you can access, or the people you know, to build a deeper connection with others in this space? And C, cultivate. What can you contribute to the mutual flourishing of yourself and the people you are getting to know? How can you cultivate within yourself a capacity for lifelong learning and adjusting to the new? So a lot of times, especially for people who are looking to be allies, this is kind of the beginnings of where you can start, accessing what it is that you have at your disposal to then be a bridge to help others.
Thank you, Joy and Carolyn. So those 3 sets of ABCs, I put the link to that in the chat so that you can download those worksheets. In between every one of those sheets is actually a page for notes. So we're offering those for you as you move through this book, and they'll also be great if you are moving through this book with a group. You can do the worksheets together. The first chapter in the book is called The ABCs of Diversity, and that is where the authors talk about how we need to teach our kids what they call the language of difference, which I just love that saying, the language of difference. And in order to do so, we need to learn a new language. So these ABCs are helpful to us as we are processing this new language ourselves, and then teaching this, a tool for teaching our kids this new language of difference. So I'm going to take a minute here and then invite our guests, starting with Jennifer Harvey. If you might just respond to some of what you've heard or to the book, and then share a little bit about what you're doing and noticing in your own work around teaching kids about diversity, and perhaps you want to share something from your own book as well.
Thank you so much. And I want to say with such gratitude and congratulations to Drs. Harris-Smith and Dr. Helsel. This book is a gift, and there's so many things I love about it. And one of the most profound has to do with precisely with what they just shared with us, which is the ABCs, because so many of us, whatever the area of justice, didn't necessarily get this kind of breakdown of sort of interpersonal to structural. There's a learning curve for the adult. Then how do we pass that on to a kid? And in a context of a world where not knowing the ABCs can really induce sort of shame, or like, I should have known this, and yet we can't know what we don't know, right? This book is just a profound gift in so many ways, but that included. And I also just want to name, my own work has focused so much on white anti-racism, and that's shown up in my thinking about parenting as I raised 2 young white children. But I am part of a lesbian-headed household. My children are across the gender continuum. One of them uses they, them pronouns. And so a book that does the ABCs with such intersectionality is just deeply needed. And again, your commitment to growing an intersectional justice framework with such concrete strategies for parents and caregivers, I just found myself turning the page after page after page saying thank you. And so again, congratulations, and what a gift to the world, and especially right now. So thank you for that. The story I want to share has to do with the ABC part, which is the sort of normalizing the challenge of where do we start? Because I certainly get that question all the time from parents, especially around questions of whiteness and anti-racism. Because for white parents or parents of white children, we didn't often get legacies of teaching around anti-racism. So the where do you start question is really vexed for parents. And so the story I wanted to offer in an affirmation of your book of just start is a story about how I experienced when we do just start, our kids will often just go right there along with us. And we actually don't need all the answers that we thought we needed to even get going, because then we go, oh, I can figure out what I need to know because my kid's my partner here. And so my story about ABCs and where do we start, sometime back when my children were much, much younger, I have a nephew who's Black, and he had an experience at school where he had a classmate who had brought a bag of Doritos to school and was letting all the kids in the class come up and smell the Doritos, because apparently that's just delicious to get to smell Doritos. And when my nephew walked up to smell the Doritos, this child, he was a kindergartner, snapped the bag shut in my nephew's face and said, "You can't smell these Doritos because you're Black." And of course, this was a horrifying experience for him and for his parents. And I decided to share this experience with my children because they're, well, for lots of reasons, but including they're very close, they're cousins, and they're, my younger was 4 at the time. And when I shared this story, my 4-year-old said to me, "Mama, is that kind of like what happened during slavery?" And I thought, I would have never thought to make that connection. And my first impulse was to say, well, no. And then I said, in fact, yeah, that is a little bit like what happened during slavery. And then we went on to process that. And my 4-year-old ended up saying, well, you know what, if I had been there, I think that the Doritos kid must have been a white kid. And I think if I was there, another white kid needed to step in and say, hey, that's mean. And so my child, who didn't yet know the term white privilege or how to be an ally, could recognize their own whiteness and how in that moment allyship could show up. Fast forward 3 or 4 years later, the same 2 children, 3 or 4 years older, we're in the car, Charlotte, North Carolina. There's an uprising because another African-American man has been killed by police. I noticed my kids were listening to the radio, and this time I chose to sort of leave it on because we begun having more conversations about police brutality. My older child said to me, "Mama, I bet if you were in that city right now, you'd put your Black Lives Matter t-shirt on and go outside and be in the protests." And I said, well, maybe I think probably I would be doing something like that, but yes. And we started a conversation and talked a little bit about what had happened. And my younger child, the same child that had made the question about the Doritos and the comment about being a white ally, said, "But Mama, can I ask, some police are safe, right?" And they were clearly really distressed by what's happening in Charlotte. And I said to my child, "Yeah, honey, of course. There are lots of good police who are trying to keep everybody safe." And I said, but the problem is we need more police who are good police who want to keep everyone safe. We need them to step up too and say, we want this to stop. And that's one of the things protesters are asking for. And this child, this was 3 years later, said to me, "Oh, kind of like what happened in the Doritos story. That someone who is the same as the person doing the harm should stand up." And it gave me the chills and blew my mind, because it wasn't like I'd abstractly talked about concepts, but that's how they scaffold. So we just have to start.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Jen. Patrick, we're going to come to you now. Patrick Reyes. What's your response to the book and this conversation? And in your own life, what are you noticing and practicing with your children? And if you'd like to read something for your book or tell a story, we'd be happy to hear that.
Yeah, I'm grateful for the invitation. And I'm grateful, Jen, for that story and Doritos as I chowed down on my Cooler Ranch all day today, and in this pandemic, introduced my children to them. And, now it's a hit. So let me just say thank you. And also just to be on this call with rock star scholars and parents. This is intimidating, knowing that I wake up every day thinking I can be the best pa. That's the phrase my kids use for me as dad, is pa. And knowing that I've never failed so beautifully and masterfully in my life at anything as I have at parenting. So the ABCs was absolutely a wonder and gift to see the number of entry points you offered audience members. As someone who, as Latino Chicano who supports scholars of color in the academy and does diversity and equity work, everything from my kids' local school, sitting on their board, to working with Children's Defense Fund. It was a joy to read this, to see at every level of my life, there's something here. There's a new tool, a new entry point for the folks that I work with that I wish I would have had, because, I don't have a story for everything. And so I just really appreciate that. And, one of the things I want to lift up that I just thought was, it spoke to me in a very particular way, was the chapter on the talk. It didn't come up in your pieces here, but it's around chapter 5, and you're exploring this issue that parents of color have to do around the talk. And you know, as a Latino, we uncles, aunts, grandmas, grandparents, my dad, they all gave us the talk. And in our various groups, it looks a little bit different. And I thought I was doing all of that right. And I thought I was doing the right talks. In a couple of, about a year and a half ago, I was organizing or helping organize a piece to end mass incarceration. And I was getting heated on a call just like this about locking up children at the border. As Latino, I mean, that was those are my kids. That's my family. And I am yelling at the top of my lungs, those are our babies. Like I was shaking the screen. I was getting so angry on this call that in ending mass incarceration, we could not end up talking about how we had locked up children at the border. And I am screaming at the top of my lungs, just pissed off about what was happening in our country. And I get off the call, still heated, sweating, red face. I close the little clamshell and I turn around. There's my kid, my oldest, my son, who's standing there looking at me wide-eyed, scared out of his mind. And we just exchange. We have the talk without saying anything. We're just staring at each other. He's 6 at the time. And he asked me 2 questions. Are they going to come get you? And are they going to lock us up? And when we think about the talk doesn't start in high school. It doesn't start in college. It, you know, some of the folks who are waking up to history and having awarenesses in our adult life, I mean, that is a privilege. My son is dealing with what is it like to be a Latino in this country when folks are coming for him. That is not a historic thing that happened way back when, but it's a current reality, and living with that fear and having to be a good pa and tell him he's loved. And to work on the, you know, Jen used the word scaffolding, my own scaffolding, that, you know, not every moment's a protest moment. I shouldn't be screaming so loud in my own home, using all the choice words I was, knowing that he would come down the stairs, you know, at some point, I'm sure, hearing me yell. But when I read your book, I was thinking about this, how necessary resources like this are, because I look at what I read as someone who does diversity, equity, race relations work, doing my own sort of Chicano. What do I need this audience to know about me and my people? There's no one taught me how to do it as a parent. You know, like for something I do every day, for the most of my time, I have studied so little about doing it. And so I'm just grateful for this because of the entry point. And, you know, the only thing I wish is that for some of us, that talk happens earlier in chapter 5. You know? So yeah, I'm grateful for this work. And that's where I'm really thinking about the impact and the power of what your work offers to the world, is that we are having the talk much earlier. And because of social media and because of the way the media works today, more people are having it. So the more tools, the more resources, the more you get out into the world and do this, I hope that you're having the talk with audiences like this, so that way they know how to have the talk with their kids. So I'm grateful. I'm grateful to be here for all of y'all.
Thank you so much, Patrick. Mihee. There's Mihee. Mihee, it's your turn. Share some of your experience with this work and some reflections on this book and how it relates to what you're doing, and if you'd like to share something from your book, Outside the Lines.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks so much for having me on this again. Just amazing to be with such incredible thinkers and teachers and scholars and parents, as Patrick mentioned. And it's encouraging to be able to have a space where we can work out some of our own struggles, our own questions. You know, what is not glamorous and glittery and beautiful about parenting? You know, it's more, we know what it is, what it looks like. So I think that the very first question about acknowledging and experiencing the sort of emotion that happens in our bodies. So the very first, like around the automatic ABCs that Joy mentioned and opened our time with, if you are afraid, ask yourself what makes you feel afraid in this space. I think for me that really, really resonates because all throughout this last maybe year or two, I don't know where they got this refrain from, if this is something that they got from their school. They actually attend like a really wonderful, amazing, it's this public charter school that's really focused on environmental justice, racial justice. They go year round. They're really focused on arts and music. And so we were happy to be able to get into the school. It's just done by lottery. They're just, limited funding for that kind of a school. And for some reason, we just kept saying, I don't know if they started saying it or if I started saying it or if the school started saying it, but they kept on saying all bodies are beautiful. Mm. And it's just sort of a mantra in our house. And I think it's important for us to begin with our bodies. And it's something that we often, because we're in these sort of academic, more cerebral kind of vocations, even with the church, we think that everything has to be textual. We think everything has to be intellectual, but that we're still working through what it means to be in our bodies. And I think that our kids are like the best teachers. Something that I've realized and learned just very recently, maybe because of the close quarters we're being forced to occupy during this pandemic, but our kids are full of emotions, and they often don't know how to verbalize these emotions. And I don't know how to verbalize their emotions. I often, struggle to verbalize my own emotions. And so to even work through the reality that we have these feelings that we can't even make legible to the person next to us, to the person who loves us. Like, what does it mean to work through that fear of not being seen or understood has been really important to us. And so, again, I just find that a wonderful starting space to think about these issues around gender and sexuality and race, ability, all those things, to think about what does it mean to step into those conversations in terms of justice work. So I was just going to read a little excerpt from my book because there are quite a bit of snippets about what we've done and what they do, and different sort of demonstrations that we've been a part of that I've taken the kids to and what that experience was like. But this is a very different kind of story. It's just kind of a regular, everyday kind of thing. And so I write here, like most parents, I think often about how to protect my children from anything that would destroy their sense of worth, dignity, and value. I think often about how to teach them to trust the ones that love them, and how to lead them to see that they have agency and that their voices and their perspectives, words, and stories are important. To try to understand my children as individuals, I observe them regularly. And the collection of stories about them, like I'm sure for anybody, any parent, is endless. So there's one morning that they came downstairs. This was a number of years ago. They were growling and hissing and gliding on all fours. Desmond, his arms sort of bent out a little, and then so he kind of crumbled and fell down the rest of the stairs basically on his face. And so he's, Mommy, I fell down and hit my face. So I run over and I pause as he kind of stretched his hands out to me, and they were completely covered in red, like Crayola red. The children decided that they would be jaguars. And since jaguars have spots, actually, I don't know if they have spots, no wonder it had been so quiet for 15 minutes. And their appendages with, thankfully, washable markers, red for Desmond, blue and green and purple for Anna. She's a bit more colorful. Both look more like alien creatures than anything you see on the Planet Earth series. And then Ozzy, our youngest, got in on it, and the three of them passed the rest of the morning just playing jaguars, lunging at each other, running away, rolling into things, swiping and clawing, like blind kittens just born into this world. Walking on hands and feet proved to be much more difficult than they anticipated, I think, as they lumbered around with measured steps. Mommy, do jaguars have stripes? Do leopards have stripes? Desmond asked as he parsed out the differences in cats. "No, dear, I think it's tigers that have stripes." I said to him. "Oh," he thought this over, clearly debating with himself whether he should get markers and make some revisions on his body. But when he saw my disapproving look, it preempted those thoughts. Yeah, okay, I want to be a tiger later. um, so I think that, I just shared this story as just the sort of regular, everyday, ordinary stuff that we deal with and we encounter as parents with our children. And it's hard for me to not extrapolate and make this super abstract for them and make this sort of into a teachable moment for them. Rather, I guess the challenge then is for me to figure out what they're doing and what it might teach me about being human. And so, yeah, they are creative and they play. And to me, that is one of the best ways to interact with and engage with difference, to be open to the sort of imagination and be able to celebrate what's human and all the emotions and the mistakes and the reality that humans are gloriously strong and just ambitious and wonderful, and masculine and feminine and white and black. And Desmond looks more like me. The Korean gene came through very strong for him. And so oftentimes he will say, "Mom, we look a lot alike." And so I think that recognizing those differences and then celebrating them and lifting them up is what they're teaching me to do. To point out those differences not as a means to alienate or to judge, but as a way to again, to be grateful and to rejoice in those differences. So again, appreciate all these stories and all the work and just what Joy and Carolyn have done with this. I know that this is going to be such a useful resource for me personally, and for a church that I just received a call to co-pastor a church with my spouse, Andy, starting in August. And I know that these conversations around differences are going to be super important. And so I'm excited about using this resource with adults and families in our congregation too.
Oh, thank you, Mihee. Okay, before we kind of move to some questions from all of you listening, I wondered if Joy or Carolyn, you might want to respond to some of which you heard from the guests. If you have any questions for them, or just if any of that sparked any further insights you might want to share with us.
I'm feeling so grateful to hear these amazing stories, and me, the playfulness with which you were able to respond to kids coming down the stairs like covered in paint is a testimony to your ability to be open to the differences of your kids and not being kind of narrow in how you expect them to grow. Me, in your latest book, Outside the Lines, you talk about being queer and the way that kind of opens up a space for play. I wondered if you wouldn't mind sharing any stories about how that's played in with your own children and how you've helped them to kind of embrace whoever it is that they are and whoever they love and how they're growing up and seeing two parents together navigating this wonderful world together.
Thanks, Carolyn. That's such a great question. Yeah, I think that the main thing is that what we try to do is to embody the possibility, to not sort of shut down any of their sort of questions in terms of, are boys allowed to have nail polish? Or can boys wear dresses? Various things like that are sort of expressions of like a very normative gender. And there's a part of me that's just like, God, I can't believe I have to field this question. And I'm still like, I just assumed that my kids were like a lot more progressive than I am already. And I see them working things out in real time. and I love having the chance to walk through them, walk through these questions with them. Especially, you know, we didn't have that. We didn't grow up with that. Those weren't even questions we could verbalize or articulate. And so, yeah, it's just a great, we play a lot of these word games and these kind of rhyming games, and some of these questions just kind of pop up in there, and it's just a part of how we're trying to make sense of the world through this, through our language. And so we play through that, and yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of stuff around like dress up and what people are wearing and how people act. There's a lot of talk about genitalia in the house, unfortunately. We, yeah, you know, that's always going to be in the air, I think. So we keep on trying to be firm about, like, you know, let's ask questions that are helpful and not use these words in a way that is hurtful. Even if you think you're trying to be funny, or if you think you're funny. So, I mean, I think that if there's anything with that, I'm just realizing, whether it's white supremacy or it's the patriarchy, that is just in the air that we breathe. And that is just a hard thing to avoid. And so hopefully the way that we play and that we experiment and the ways that we ask questions, those are ways that we can sort of resist those structures.
There's a question. Thanks, Mihee. There's a question for any of the guests who want to answer. How do you find this work exploring diversity with kids different when you're doing it inside versus outside the church? Who likes that question? All right, well, all the guests are perhaps muted at the moment, so that's why no one's saying anything. Jen.
The only thing I would respond, and I pause because I don't really spend a lot of time formally in the church these days, for lots of complicated reasons. Although I'm ordained American Baptist and I have a deep love for the church. In some ways, I think when I work in churches, I find that we think, especially in predominantly white spaces, even in pro-LGBT inclusive progressive spaces, we think that our work of theology is much more helpful than we've actually allowed it to be. And so I actually find it sometimes difficult because those assumptions that progressive Christianity is really doing the work that it needs to do, actually, and in my experience, it really isn't yet, can actually make it more difficult, quite frankly. And so I don't say that to disparage the church, but I find that people are hoping theology is going to answer, but unless you're really rooted in, Black and Latinx and queer theologies in a congregation, which most congregations are not, then that isn't going to be the case.
Any of the other Joy or Carolyn, do you want to respond to that question as well? Or should we take another one? Okay. I'm going to someone asked if you could recommend any faith-based children's books on inclusiveness, anti-racism, and LGBTQ community. And I know both Joy and Carolyn could answer that. One of the most fantastic parts about the book is that there's a very robust appendix that has diversity reading lists for kids of all ages. So those would be in the book. But also maybe you want to speak to it. And I had a question. So while you're thinking about that, I wanted to ask, what are some common mistakes that we make when we're starting these conversations with kids?
I loved what Mihee said earlier about assuming that her kids were kind of more progressive than they already were. And I think sometimes we assume already that because we feel a certain way about a particular group, or that we've done our own work in one area, that we assume that our children have too, that they've just absorbed it by osmosis from us. But unfortunately, that's not the case. They're surrounded in their own cultures within school, their own the messages that they get from their peers and from the curriculum. And so it's really important that we're really explicit, because my kids go to school in Texas, where the curriculum still doesn't do an adequate job of talking about the presence of African Americans in Texas history and the role of slavery in the Texas Revolution, and in the role of Mexican Americans in the creation of Texas, and the ways that we continue to inflict anti-Mexican sentiment on whole portions of the population. So these things that are just part of our curriculum get absorbed by our kids. And so it's really important that we are asking them questions about, so what are you learning this year in Texas history? And, how is this being explored? And how are they portraying this person? So we're going back and forth, and we're giving them another perspective so that they can return to the classroom with a little bit of a more critical eye and listening ear, and that they can also be advocates for different ways of learning. So one of the mistakes, I think, is definitely assuming that they're already there, or that they can already kind of take on these kinds of questions in their own spheres before they're really ready.
If I could follow that up, one of the other mistakes, and I think this is just, it's simple, but it's huge. Coming from having studied communications, we don't listen. We don't listen. I think that oftentimes, especially if you think that you know a particular area or you've gone to school, we don't listen. And as a parent, when I became a parent, one of the things I had to learn was to listen again, listen differently, listen intently, pay attention. And it's not just the verb, just the verbal, but it's also the nonverbal. And Mihee sort of began to talk about that. But just as we move throughout, we're not taught enough about listening to each other and to listen to, and I think that that's huge. So one of the big mistakes is that we don't listen. We listen to respond, but we don't listen to really hear and get a sense deeply of what's being said, the text, right, and the subtext of what's being said. So we don't listen.
How's a way we can how can we practice listening? I'm thinking about when my 17-year-old teenage boy comes down the stairs, and he'll often just walk right into my office and lay this like bomb of a question on me, like when I'm in the middle of my work day, and I'll just turn around and say, wait, what? Hold on, hold on, sit down. It's like, okay, we need, and it takes me a minute. I have to pause and acknowledge. I'm loving the ABCs for helping me, work through my first reactions, because there's fear, there's afraid. I'm trying to control like what he's thinking, but really just, how do you kind of stop? What practice do you have for stopping and listening? Is there anything specifically you do or remind yourself in that moment that helps you listen better? Unmute. I'm sorry. Hold on. Can we unmute?
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. I think you started to mention it. And I think being sort of in this COVID-19 area, we've all sort of been on pause, right? On pause in a way that we've never been on pause before. And so I think that, you started out by saying, you pause because there's the shock of what you just heard, and the fact that you're already doing something else. And so, it's kind of, the mindfulness, being present to the moment, saying, okay, so what's going on here? And then, so I think it's pausing. I think it's allowing the person or the child to kind of say what's going on to the best of their ability, but then also maybe asking a question that might elicit some more information, and kind of getting a sense of sort of what has brought this moment current, and then kind of moving forward from there. And then, with the ABCs, of course, just noticing your own reactions and going, okay, how do I deal with my own reactions in a way, or my own feelings, so that I can then be present for my child. And so that's something that I would think about. How do I deal with, what's most important in this moment? my child asking the question or the fact that I'm shocked by what my child said. And then when I can parse that, go, okay, you know what, deal with your shock later. Let's deal with the kid and the question that they have and why they're asking and what may have prompted this. And then we can come back and deal with your stuff. So I don't know if that's helpful, but it does start with the pausing and kind of going, what's most important, my own sort of shock or the question or what is bringing us to this moment right now.
That's fantastic. Any other thoughts from Patrick Patrick?
Yeah, I would just adding to that is it's, for me, at least in my context, it's got to be daily practice. We're talking about this as if these things don't happen daily, as if the racism, the violence that we're experiencing in the country is not a daily condition. And part of my purpose or my call is to make sure my kids know that they're the product of generations of love. Every single day we do practices in the morning and at the night. The meditations I do with my son and my daughter, they're the ones that my grandmother taught me. As a lay Catholic who has indigenous roots and talking about how she prayed over us and breathed and remind us that we can call her memory to ourselves, to know that we're loved every single day. That's daily practice. So I would also just say that these interruptions that seem like they're extraordinary, if you have a daily practice, if you have those moments with your kids, with your family, with your friends that you can return to and use that practice. We do meditation on mindfulness and visualizations that are adaptations of what my grandmother taught me. It provides that sort of regular rhythm. So something happened today. Yeah. Let's ask grandma what she thinks.
Yeah.
And being able to slow down and be present so that way they know that they're loved. I think that's at least how I do it. It's got to be tied to daily practice. If it's not, it feels like it's something that's unbearable and doesn't give them the tools that when I'm not here anymore, my son, my daughter are still going to be able to call on Grandma Carmen in a way that will guide them and heal them in these moments. So I would just add this, it's really got to be daily practice.
That is so beautiful. Thank you so much. That makes me think of our other book, When Kids Ask Hard Questions, in the chapter at the endless song, that this is a song that goes on and on. It's not just sung once, but this is something that we return to, these conversations over and over again. And I would say too, yes, in this moment, it's a daily practice. Thank you for that. Yeah, Carolyn.
I just wanted to add for parents who aren't in that daily practice yet, to be able to know that you can also go back when kids say things and in the moment you mess up and you just kind of switch the subject or you ignore it or you say something that later you feel like wasn't the best way to respond. There's always another chance to come back to it. And our kids, again, that takes that reflection on your own part, but our kids pay attention to what we say and we can say, remember when I said this, I just want to reflect on that again with you if you don't mind. Again, going through those ABCs, I think there's a section in the curriculum part of our appendices where it's like when kids ask embarrassing questions. It could also be a section on when kids ask hard questions. And I think the acronym is just, a bunch of A's, pieced together because all right, we might be not ready for it unless we're kind of in that regular pattern. But, those A's stand for things like, affirm the question, even if it makes us uncomfortable, like affirm the kids that are asking it, acknowledge if you don't know the answer to something, admit when you're, still needing to look for information. And sometimes if it's appropriate, engage and help them to ask the person that they're asking the question about, if there's a relationship there that's possible. So another way to engage kids themselves in learning more about something. So this is just, I just feel so blessed by all of the gifts that you all are offering.
Me too. I feel like we just need another, 2 hours. So we are coming to the last 5 minutes, however, of this beautiful hour together. And I wanted to ask if each of our guests might just offer one word of encouragement, kind of a closing thought or a word of encouragement. So I'm popping this question on you, sorry. But is there one thing, because this is hard work and it's daily work and we mess up and it's tiring and, it's hard. So is there a word of encouragement that you might offer? And I'm also going to say that we're going to send a follow-up email tomorrow with all of these panelists, information and books and some resources for you all, so you can find out more about these folks and follow them and so forth. Because as you can tell, each one has this big universe and wealth of information that they live in and teach in. So, but let's start with, who wants to start? I don't know. How about Jen? You have a final word of encouragement?
I just want to close again by just saying thank you for this book. And because the encouraging word is, and this is true, I know it in the depth of my soul, that committing to this journey with our children, it's not a burden, it's a gift of liberation and freedom. And when I look back on what I had to sort of unlearn and differently learn and find words for, and I see already in my children, words and movement and connections with others that are 20 years ahead of where I was when I was their age. I'm like, oh, together, all of us in this diverse, multiracial, multi-queered, multi-gendered, multi-classed way, all of the multis, we're building liberation and freedom together, and it truly is bound up together. So it's a gift, not a burden. And thank you for this book. I'm going to read it and recommend it and recommend it.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for being here, Jen. Mihee, what about you? Any final words?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'm thinking a lot about it's important to receive grace, and oftentimes that grace comes from our children. And so I think of all the times I have made mistakes and I've said I'm sorry. Something again that I never heard my parents ever say to me. But what the sort of grace that I receive from my kids and the kind of regular, to use Patrick's words again, practice of reconciliation. I mean, I think that right there, we're embodying and enacting another possibility, and we're building a different world together. Because we're upending those power structures. I'm not the complete authority on everything, and I make mistakes, and I'm willing to learn too. Yeah, give yourselves grace and be open to that grace coming from your own children.
Thanks, Mihee. Patrick, the final word?
Yeah, I would just say that this is multi-generational work. So Carmelita, my daughter, as far back as we can go is, 5 generations, there's Carmelita in every single thing. And I hope that for the 5 generations beyond her, that there's another Carmelita that because of books like this and y'all on this call doing the work, that they will experience a lot more love, a lot more grace, acceptance, inclusion, equity, because of the work that we're putting in today. So, I mean, it's not just a gift for the communities that we're working in right now, but I see this as a 5-generation gift for that Carmelita who has yet to be seen, but we know we all love her right now on this call, and our family. And I would just put that out there. This is a 5-generation gift in reading this book and working with your communities, from my community to yours. So I'm grateful.
Thank you. Carolyn, what about you?
My heart is so full of gratitude for all of the people, and I think encouraging our own children to use their gifts in this work is also, I think, a helpful reminder that we feel a lot of pressure on ourselves to teach them. But as you all have shared also, our kids can be such amazing teachers too. So looking for the gifts that your children are already displaying in this work and encouraging that so that they can see themselves as leaders in doing this work in their communities.
Thank you, Carolyn. Joy.
This book, I believe Carolyn would agree, is to encourage not just conversation, but communication general, to engage across the board, engage with our children, and engage with other people in other places across our differences. And as it's already been mentioned, as human beings, we will make mistakes. And we need to get back up again and try and continue to press forward. And I think that's, the grace that, as Mihee mentioned, that our kids provide us. That's the grace that God gives us, and the promise that we can fall down, but we can get back up again. And this book helps us to trip, but to keep moving and to keep pressing forward. So I am so full as well. To all of, to Patrick, who I'm meeting for the first time, to Mihee, to Jen, you all, I'm full. I'm thankful to each and every one of you. I hope to have an opportunity to talk to all of you.
Yes.
Yeah. And I'm thankful, especially thankful to Carolyn for being an ally and trying to practice what she preaches. That has meant a lot. And so thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Joy, Carolyn, Jen, Mihee, and Patrick, so much for taking the time to be here with us. This has been such a gift, and I hope you're seeing some of the comments that are just echoing my words, that what a gift this hour has been. Thank you all for joining us and taking the time out of your evening. If you haven't gotten your copy yet, well, the ABC University, you know where to find it, chalicepress.com or wherever you buy books. Those the downloadable worksheets are, we'll send a link to those in the follow-up email, but they're also available on the abcsofdiversity.com website and chalicepress.com website. And if we encourage you to not only buy this book for yourself, but share it with somebody else that also needs to be with you in this conversation. So we're really hoping that small groups of parents and teachers will form all over the country to work through this book together and affect change in their schools and communities and churches and families. And if you find the book insightful and love it as much as we do, please also, we'd love it if you leave a review on Amazon or Goodreads. That really helps persuade others who are looking at the book to actually purchase it. So that would be a huge gift to us if you would do this for us. And I think that's it. Thank you so much. We'll have this recorded too, so we'll send you the link to the recording so you can perhaps share it with others in your community. And may your journey learning and teaching the language of difference be rich and powerful, and may it change the world. Thank you so much for being with us tonight, everybody. Good night.
Good night.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night.